Hi all, my name is Valdemar. Welcome to Better Your Chess. Today it is time for another supporter game analysis. Supporter of the day is Jonathan van Nie, the brother of Piotr van Nie, who sent in his game last week. So this time around, Jonathan, thank you very much for sending in your game and supporting the channel. Okay, so you know the drill. We'll pretty much do the same thing as last week. I'm going to take a look at a game that he played against Heima. And we're going to do that again with a little bit of help from Stockfish. I've asked Stockfish to analyze the game, or at least pinpoint the so-called inaccuracies, mistakes, and blunders. But apart from that, I don't really know what to expect. And I see it as my task, my job to try and translate these indications from Stockfish into human language, something that is useful for you, something that you can use in your own games and hopefully learn something. Okay, having said that, this game was played recently during the internal club competition at Chaturanga here in Amsterdam, our very own chess club. So both Jonathan and Henny are club mates of mine. And there's quite a big disparity as far as the ratings is concerned, because Jonathan can boast a 19-14 rating and Henny has a 15-14 rating, so there is 400 points in it. Doesn't mean that things will be easy, but let's see if Jonathan, who's also commanding the white pieces, can be victorious over Henny in this game. So he starts with e4. c6, yeah, the Caro-Kann, d4, the classical center, d5, attacking the center where white is weak. On e4, that pawn is not protected. And normally that forces some sort of concession. Either you play knight c3, after which black, of course, can take that center pawn and white no longer has the two center pawns. Or you force white into putting this pawn on a dark square so that you can gain some counter control on the light squares. But in this game, Jonathan plays one of his pet lines, and I've seen him play this before, 1 or 2 years ago, during a league competition game. There, the black player was much better prepared, I want to say, and in the end, Jonathan lost that game. He plays here f3. That's a very funny move and maybe not the best move to try and play for an opening advantage, but interesting nonetheless. Yeah. So the idea here is to say, okay, Caro-Kann player, you think you can destroy my classical pawn center when I have two of them abreast in the center? Not a problem, I'll just recapture, and I still have those two beautiful center pawns abreast in the center. And not only that, I also have very easy development, right? I'll just put this guy here, and I'll castle, and my rook immediately has an open file. So, if anything, black should not do that, right? He should not oblige. He should not play so compliantly. So, after f3, Henny played e6. Okay, that's a common move. I think that's a decent move. Somehow, I also don't like locking in the bishop from c8, but it's a very decent way to try and continue. And he's saying to white, well, as long as you have a pawn on f3, your knight also cannot reach its natural development square, right? So you have a bad piece, I also have a bad piece, and we both stand badly, right? Let's see how play continues. Knight c3, that makes a lot of sense, putting some more pressure in the center there, and at least it's clear where that knight needs to go, so let's try and be flexible, put the knights on their most natural development squares first, and then later on we'll figure out where the bishops have to go. So knight d7, knight d7, yeah, I mean there are several other moves possible, I suppose, but well, knight e7 was played. My apologies. I thought it was knight d7. Knight e7. That move surprises me. Because normally f6 is the natural development square for the knight, right? And it reminds me of the game that Piotr played, the one that I discussed last week, where the opponent played the knight to d7, and from there it didn't really have a future to jump forward. The same seems to be the case with this knight, because this center pawn is here doing a job. It's controlling this square and it's controlling this square. That means the knight cannot really jump forward. Yes, maybe the knight can jump to g6, but we know from experience that knights on b6, g6, b3 and g3 are not ideally placed, and normally they can be chased by rook pawns. Now, if that's going to happen in this game, and if it's good, correct, I don't really know, but somehow I don't really like this move so much. Is it possible that that Henny was afraid of this move? But then you can just go into a normal French defense, right? Where white also has to lose a tempo, for instance, if he wants to play a normal French structure. So he has to lose a tempo with the f-pawn, and then black can also, how to say, justify that he also has to lose a tempo with c6, c5. So that would be normal play. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to the game. Already here it's taking on quite an individual, how to say, an individual train of events. Okay, my English is leaving me there for a moment. Bishop e3. That move also makes a lot of sense, I guess. It's probably quite easy for white to figure out where his pieces go, right? This knight goes here, this bishop goes here, this knight probably goes here, and this bishop will be kept at home for the moment. And then I'm envisaging something like queen d2 and maybe castles queen side. And then if black castles king side, which statistically happens more often than not, then who knows, you can launch an attack with your king side pawns. Yeah. So bishop e3 seems to fit that schedule. Knight g6, knight g6. So one of the things I would look at in such a moment is, of course, to push the h-pawn. But here that's clearly wrong, because that can be taken by the knight. So under these circumstances, you know, with the pawn on f3 and not the knight on f3, h2, h4 would be wrong. But let's see how Jonathan goes about it. Yeah, he plays the other flexible move, right? Knight g to e2. I also like that. He is now strengthening his d4 pawn. e4 is also quite strong. But the problem, of course, is the bishop. Will the bishop play a significant role, a useful role later on? And how about those two knights? They are currently on the same circuit. So they're maybe fighting for the same squares. Of course, we can imagine this knight going this way, or maybe this way later on. Even though I would not play knight f4 so quickly, because that would allow black's knight to exchange off and get rid of this rather troublesome piece. Okay, lots of considerations already there in the opening. I think I should maybe not linger too long. Anyway, knight d7. Yeah, also quite flexible, also makes sense, I suppose. I don't see anything wrong with that. Queen d2, as predicted, yeah, queen d2. And now, bishop b4. Yeah, okay. That move does pin the knight on c3, but is it a good move? Is it a good move? White currently is really quite strong on e4, so in that sense, the bishop move, the pin, doesn't really add any serious pressure to the e4 square. And if black ever decides to take, there will never be doubled pawns, and he will also solve the problem of the superfluous knight. This knight will be happy to recapture once he exchanges here. And then the file for the bishop comes open. Of course, white will have the bishop pair. So I'm not really sure why black is putting the bishop on b4. Because he shouldn't trade, and it's also not really putting any serious pressure on the position. If anything, I would probably prefer to put the bishop on e7, just a normal move, and take it from there. Something like this I like better. Because what does Jonathan play, of course, you know, with pieces on your half of the board, especially bishops jumping to those pinning positions, you can always just pose the question, what are you doing here? And of course, as mentioned, you should not exchange. You should probably just go back to e7, for instance. But then maybe a2, a3 has been a useful move. Could be, we don't really know. But to be consistent with playing the bishop to b4, Henny now decides to put the bishop on a5. But the bishop can no longer retreat to this diagonal where it might be more useful. And of course it's always vulnerable to a b2, b4 move. So I don't really like the way this is turning, or I don't really like the turn this is taking for black so far. And oh, to be honest, this is actually one of the inaccuracies as indicated by Stockfish. Yeah. Also, bishop b4 he didn't like. I'm forgetting to point that out. Bishop b4 and bishop a5. So this little maneuver Stockfish doesn't like. Yeah. Tidum. Now, but how to continue? Wait a second. I'm again looking at this h4 move. Because there's tactics, huh? There is tactics. With the queen on d2, this is interesting. You can play this. Of course, the queen can't take, but the knight also can't take, because look at that. That's a hit at 2 targets, and white would be winning immediately. So that's an idea for Jonathan to remember. This h4 move looks really nice. It just, you really threaten to overrun black with h4, h5. So maybe black's best guess is to try and stop that pawn. But then, you know, this square, I don't like it. This pawn, I don't like it. Now maybe this knight move starts making more sense, because then you will never be able to castle. Yeah, this would be the way to play for white. Yeah. Okay, maybe that was a missed opportunity, because white didn't play that. After bishop a5, what did he play? Ah, okay, yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that too much. He plays g3 to try and develop the bishop, but somehow this development scheme to my eye doesn't fit in with what white's doing. I think white should normally just try and castle queenside in these positions. Now he's taking time to put his bishop on a square where it is really not ideally placed. Not only are his own pawns in the way, but with the bishop on g2 he's also looking at this wall of granite. And yeah, I don't know, it's also another pawn move. It's weakening this square, so somehow I don't like this. I keep forgetting to look at Stockfish. Stockfish doesn't like this move either. He says it's a mistake. Okay. Black plays pawn takes e4. Now, when I started the analysis, I said you shouldn't do this, because then white happily recaptures with his pawn here, right? But after g2, g3, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to try and get some sort of a foothold in the center. So I see now Stockfish is suggesting this move. Yeah, this is also the type of move that Jonathan's opponent played in the game I was referring to earlier. Of course, if you can get this e5 square, that would be ideal. Something like this would probably be very bad, because the troublesome knight from g6 would jump to e5, and all of a sudden you know, we're fighting an isolated pawn, and we have these and these kinds of threats, so all of a sudden I think black would be significantly better. So we don't like that. But if we don't do that, then black is threatening to break up this proud pawn center and again gain some access to this e5 square. So then it makes sense to push like this, but maybe we're just now pressuring this white center. Because with knight f6 we're attacking it once, twice, 3 times, and now this pin starts to make sense, because now the bishop is also joining in the attack for d5. This would be one way to play for black, maybe just to try and get counterplay here. Yeah. Okay, so after g3, Henny did play d takes e4, and Jonathan recaptured with f takes e4, but now he did not continue with e6, e5, and that's of course a difficult move, because you've put your pawn on e6, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to lose another tempo with e6, e5. You really have to realize that that's a good plan. He now tries to pressure that pawn with the knight, and of course he's threatening to take on e4 because the knight on c3 is now pinned. So this seems to make a little bit of sense, but the knight is vulnerable to the pawn. But I don't know if you want to play that immediately, because then you give up this beautiful square. Yeah, chess is difficult. I'm not sure I really understand what's going on, so I need Stockfish's help a little bit here. Because Stockfish says that this move is a mistake. And he says white should now play this move. And then when it seems that this is so good that you jump into the center square, he says, I can just develop the bishop over here. But, you know, to human eyes that looks just strange, because for one, I can just take this beautiful bishop. Okay, Stockfish doesn't like it at all, because, you know, not always is it good to win a bishop for a knight, because we have to look at the remaining pieces on the board. And this piece, it remains bad, right? This piece, yeah, it's not very useful. It could drop back later, but this is not a useful square. Maybe the most useful square for the bishop would be here. But we can see that white has the opportunity to castle, either to the king side or the queen side, connect his rooks, and really all his remaining pieces are very well placed. And I think the real culprit is this one and this one, and the fact that black is lacking in space. So I think that explains why Stockfish really prefers white's position here. But difficult, yeah, difficult considerations here. So that was a mistake, again, according to Stockfish. But according to Stockfish, Jonathan now also makes a mistake. But let's remember, there are two types of mistakes. You either make a mistake, according to Stockfish, when you allow your opponent to hurt you, but he also considers it's a mistake if you fail to hurt your opponent. Yeah. So you either allow something that you shouldn't have, or you pass up on an opportunity that you should have taken. So maybe Stockfish doesn't like this move because he preferred e5. Okay, yeah. But it's probably also because of the fact that bishop g2 again allows this e6, e5 move. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Because that really keeps the bishop sort of stupid, right? The bishop on g2 will never really be a happy camper. And again, we're starting to fight for the central squares with black. Yeah, and that then is clearly why this move is better. Yes, it does give up the d5 square, but it also means that black might be exchanging off his one really good piece, and he will be left with clearly worse pieces than white. And this was one of those moments for white to really gain space. And let's look at another aspect of gaining space. Yeah, not only do we kick the knight and win tempo, but it also means that for the foreseeable future we make sure that we have this pivot square on e4 for our knights and for our bishops to really move into the center and be able to control the opponent's half of the board from that very center square. So that's why gaining space is also so important. Again, I would be hesitant to give up this dark squared bishop, but that's probably my dogmatic thinking. It's not so easy to make that next step and figure out, or realize I should say, that the remaining pieces on the board, even though you're down the bishop pair, the infamous bishop pair with white, that the remaining pieces are clearly better than black's counterparts. So bishop g2 designated a question mark by Stockfish, because black now should have played e5. He doesn't. He plays castles, and again white now gets the opportunity to play e5 again, and that would be, I think, very good. Again, this move, sorry, my apologies, here e5 would be very good. If we go here, especially with the king sitting where it is, and maybe you need to insert b to b4, because otherwise this knight will not be able to move. You can see that we'll be able to let all of white's pieces flow in, and there is this semi-open f-file, and you can also start harassing this knight and just completely ruin black's king side. So that's where white's advantage is. White will have a very easy game and quite obvious plans and moves. So that's probably another opportunity missed. e5. Now, however, with the pawn on g3, Jonathan switches to this h4 idea. But what I somehow don't like is that his king is still in the center. His king is still in the center. And you know, you can just look at your worst piece. This is your worst piece. If you want to finish your development and your remaining pieces are sort of okay, I mean, they can be improved, then why not play this move once again? Once again, e6, e5 is very good. And now this h5, I'm not so sure, because there is maybe a counter in the center. You have to calculate that, because you do allow this capture here. But maybe, I don't know, knight h8 looks awful. Knight h8 looks awful. Does this counter in the center, does it work? Aha, my idea was of course to jump to e5 with the knight, but you recapture with the bishop, and then this move is not possible. Yeah, okay. So e5 maybe still can be countered with this move. Okay, let's play this horrible move. Then this looks quite logical, but of course you keep things closed. And again, you take this pawn, but we take now the queens of the board, and we play against the doubled pawns. This is a very typical move, yeah? And here, I think I sort of like black. Here I think I sort of like black, because that e pawn is dead, and all of his pieces, well, apart from the knight again on h8. But if I get to play this and this and this, you know, then all of those pieces are excellently placed, actually. This is also a vulnerable square. This bishop is still silly. This knight can't really jump forward. Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, difficult, yeah? h4. h5. Moving that pawn. Moving that pawn on the side where you're castled. I don't know. Stockfish doesn't like it. He says it's a question mark. Again, e5 makes a lot of sense. e5 makes a lot of sense. Just to go, yeah, just to go for that same type of setup, huh? I mean, there's also now this idea. How, if anything, how is black ever going to defend that pawn? I mean, there's just a horrible pawn on h5. You can kick the defender, gain space, gain the e4 square, castle, and just take it from there. Yeah, win the game from there. But Jonathan plays this move. Now he decides to play this. Yeah. Now, well, he's threatening this move, right? He's threatening e4, e5. And it's so funny. Again, why not this e6, e5 move? This happens over and over again. And then when you have Stockfish analyze a game, you will see that he says, yeah, you made 3 mistakes, or 4 mistakes, or 3 blunders. And then they all have to do with the same idea, several moves in a row. So this e6, e5 is of paramount importance when you play against these structures in the center. It's a very typical move to remember. e7, e5 or e6, e5 against this Caro-Kann with f2, f3. Also with your knight on g6, because you want that knight to be able to jump to e5 later, occupy a center square. So something to remember. Yeah. Here, for instance, this is not really a problem, because okay, maybe you should first take here. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is not a problem, yeah, because there's a check on d8, or there's this type of move. And I think black will be very happy. I mean, white can give up his bishop here and ruin the structure, but white's structure is also ruined and his pieces are far from ideal. Black has the bishop pair here. But after bishop d5, it seems that Henny is panicking a little bit. He could have played e6, e5 again, but he plays this move, bishop c3, and he voluntarily gives up his bishop pair and the pin on the knight. That's something I would never really consider. But how do you recapture, huh? Because according to Stockfish, knight c3 is a mistake. But the question is, why? Why is it a mistake? I mean, it makes so much sense. Well, you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's not difficult. This game seems to turn into a theme game concerned with the move e6, e5. If you recapture with the queen, then the move e6, e5 is not possible, because I take it, and there is also not an exchange of the queens. So queen c3 simply takes away the possibility of playing e6, e5. It also improves white's queen on those very dark squares that Henny just exchanged off. So what is he left with? This horrible bishop. And if he cannot free it up, and if he cannot free up this knight, then what is he left with? Very poor pieces. Space disadvantage. Weak pawn here. A king that will be in danger soon. Because I think white will probably go here, but maybe he could even go here. And then there is this horrible f-file with the pin on the knight. Yeah, okay, I understand why knight c3, queen c3 would have been better. But knight c3 was played. Yes! Congratulations! Henny! Oh, well, maybe it was basically the only move to stop e4, e5. And then, by process of elimination, you get to this move. Finally, he does play e5 now. But is it maybe a little bit too late? Did he really have to give up the dark square bishop first? There was no necessity to do that, right? Okay, Jonathan is no slouch either. Of course, he doesn't take on e5. He pushes the pawn now. He doesn't want this knight to come here. And, I mean, he's very strong on those light squares. And this is basically protected passed pawn. Who knows what this pawn can do later. Doesn't mean that this bishop is good. But, okay, clearly white is better now. Yeah. But at least, you know, black gets to play bishop d4 and frustrate white from castling queenside. I'm pretty sure Jonathan would have liked a castle queenside. Now he's satisfied with castling kingside. Okay. Check. Yeah, that is true. Do we like that? Well, maybe Jonathan figured this one out and he thought, listen, you can take my pawn on b2, but I'll crash through on f6. That seems to be a very good deal. But, you know, Henny's going for it anyway. Yeah, maybe there's no better option, because leaving the queen on d8 means that your knight on f6 will be pinned, and you want to participate in a game of chess sooner or later. Huh? You want to have the feeling that you're also doing something. That can, of course, be a trap, a psychological trap. But maybe it's the best try anyway, just to harass white's position from the left flank. So there is king h2. Now this I don't really understand. Why does he interpose the bishop? I thought the idea was, but I didn't look deeply into the position, that if he now, well, you can't take, of course, because then you just simply lose the queen. Yeah. Okay, you can't lose the queen anyway. But I thought you wanted to keep this guy here anyway. So why is he playing bishop e3? Why is he removing the bishop away from the pressure on the knight? King h2 makes a lot of sense, because you will never be in check anymore on that diagonal. Looks like a decent move. I mean, bishop e3 is not a mistake, don't get me wrong. Of course, you can't take. And Henny now says, well, you know, then I'll just drop back to c7, and at least I'm no longer on d8. Yeah. Somehow this structure, not somehow, this structure reminds me of the game that was played last January during the Tata Steel chess tournament between Jordan van Vrees with the white pieces and Anish Giri in the last or penultimate round of the tournament. And I thought it was a bit naive of Anish Giri to allow white to ruin his dark squares on the king's side and sacrifice the exchange. According to Stockfish, this is already an excellent move to play here, because in the long term it is very, very difficult to defend all those horrible dark squares. So I would really like this. I can understand why you don't want to play this immediately, because maybe it's not so clear. So Jonathan makes the most of it. You know, if he has the luxury to double rooks, to involve his rooks, and he can do much more efficiently than black, why not just do it? Yeah. And then if we can maybe immediately recapture a pawn on f6 with the second rook, then of course the exchange sacrifice is already a lot better. So now he plays the queen to d6, but is the queen better placed on d6? The queen is also undefended there. It's vulnerable maybe to a bishop c5, to a knight b5. It does protect, of course, the knight on f6, but shouldn't you somehow try and make a rook move? Maybe a rook to the d file? Or take on d5 and try to exchange some stuff? I would also look for targets. Maybe this guy, huh? I mean, I'm eyeing this guy. So this idea would maybe be interesting. You can't take with the queen. If you take with the pawn, then sometimes you have these ideas. Apparently not here. Well, there is d6. Right, blocking that diagonal, but according to the computer there's also this horrendously strong move. Yeah, of course, because this is just murder on the River Nile, murder on the chessboard. But the position is difficult to play. Queen d6, queen d6. I don't know. Doesn't seem to add so much to black's position. Well, it does protect the knight, yeah, okay. So, rook a f1, let's go with that. a6. That's also a very slow move somehow. But what is black to do? What is black to do? His pieces have no scope whatsoever. White's building up quite nicely. Well, if the knight on f6 is the target, why not move the knight on f6 then? Maybe look for greener pastures with the knight, yeah? That makes sense. It's not ideal, but that makes sense. I think that would be a better move, yeah. a6. b4, okay. I said the queen would be vulnerable here, maybe to a bishop c5 or a knight b5. And now clearly Jonathan is preparing bishop b5 to win the exchange. Ah, but wait a second. Now he is allowing bishop c5? Now he's allowing bishop c5, but he's putting another square on the d8 h4 diagonal. So both bishop moves are tremendously strong. Bishop c5 basically wins the game on the spot because you win the exchange. And then you take it from there. It should be just a technical matter. But bravely enough, Jonathan chooses the other route. And why not? Why not? Because he will be able to crash through now. Because also here, if the knight moves, you take on d8, right? Yeah, okay, so rook a to d8 really is a bad move, and Stockfish even considers this a blunder. So this really is the losing move. Yeah, of course, white was clearly on top, but now black is making things too easy for white, I think. Let's go with the game. Bishop g5. Interesting, yeah. Bishop c5 was also possible. I mean, he prepared it with b4. Queen d7. He lets go of those dark squares even more. Okay, I really like this. Yeah, okay, this makes perfect sense. Now he says, I'm strong on the dark squares. My rooks don't necessarily control dark squares, but my dark squared bishop does. And my dream is, of course, to have a bishop here and a queen here, and then checkmate black on g7. So what does he do? And it's really not too difficult to calculate. Even if you don't see it through to the end, you can just feel that this is tremendous. He sacrifices the exchange. That's a piece. Black has to recapture, and now here comes the bishop. The big threat, of course, is now queen and mate. Let's see how Henny is defending. There is probably only one decent move. Wow. Okay, that's tricky. Did Jonathan see that move? Otherwise, maybe it would also have been good to take with the bishop first. Because now how to get in the remaining pieces, huh? The knight from c3 isn't doing anything. So he is playing... No, I thought he would play knight d1, but he didn't. Yeah. Now, knight d1 is very strong, because there is basically no way to stop this piece from getting to this awfully strong square, and then you can come in for the kill again. So normally what you would have to do is, of course, use your useless bishop to try and exchange off this potentially very dangerous attacker. But the problem here is that we recapture, and then we're hitting this one. You can still try and defend that. Not really with the king, because then there is a check, and you go back, and maybe we go here. Or better yet, maybe something... apologies here, maybe something like rook f5, completely locking in the queen and hitting h5. So knight d1 would be strong after king h7. But now I don't understand Jonathan. He managed to keep that dark squared bishop on the board, right? And he wants to keep it there to mate black's king. But now he just is satisfied to take the exchange back. Yes, it remains a winning position, right? He's up a pawn and a position. But would you do that? Would you really relinquish the pressure like that? Because this bishop is worth clearly 2 of those rooks. This guy isn't doing anything, right? Because white is strong enough on the d file. There's absolutely no problem if black starts opening up the d file. I don't really like bishop takes d8 so much, but he does it anyway. The queen now recaptures. Maybe he had a follow-up. But play now becomes a little bit more slow again. There is d6 to play with the passed pawn, but he plays this move. What's the idea? I mean, even if you put the queen on f6, there's not an immediate threat, right? I would have rerouted the knight, you know, and just trust in the strength of the position and feel that I have the time to reroute the knight via d1 to e3 to f5 and then have a crushing position. Okay, so anyway, this is how he played. Probably technically not the most correct way to play. f6, f6, that weakens some squares, right? It weakens e6 and g6. But black does not want white to enter on the f6 square. That much is clear. That much is clear. Question remains how to continue. Okay, but Jonathan now finds a very, how to say, a very creative idea. This is making inroads into black's position in a completely different way. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. But there are ways to defend, of course. The queen is not so active on a7, but it forces black to protect the b-pawn. Queen c8 was chosen. Maybe rook f8 to f7 was there, or queen d7, something like that. Let's go with the game. Queen c8. D takes c, but now I'm pulling. I don't really like the way white is playing this. He is not focusing anymore. He was going from the left to the right now. Now he's exchanging and he's pulling black's queen forward. I don't like it so much. Of course, there is still an idea because he's making this square available for his knight. But the queen is clearly better placed than it has ever been throughout the game. Knight d5 anyways, because probably if you take on c2, then knight d5... Oh, of course, queen c2 is simply impossible still because of queen takes b7. Yeah. I understand this move, yeah. The bishop wasn't doing anything on g4, but according to Stockfish, this is a blunder. It would make sense to relieve the queen from her defensive duties on b7, and both sides probably missed the point, and I also don't really understand. I can see now what Stockfish's idea is, and it's really quite pretty. So which pieces can maybe still be improved? The bishop can be improved to f3, not to h3, but there is this really brilliant idea with rook f3. Still, you can't really take on c2, I guess, because f6 is falling. Let's not forget the queen was not only protecting here but also protecting here. But if you don't do that, then of course the big threat is to reroute the rook to the c file and come in with crushing effect, I think, on c7. But that's a difficult maneuver to see. Anyway, it was probably so difficult that Jonathan tried to find new inroads. He retreated the queen, missing this opportunity. King g7, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The king also has to join in the defense. Absolutely. Bishop f3, improving one of those white pieces, but blocking the queen and the rook. So where to go from here, huh? Yeah, if you're being attacked, maybe the counter attack is the best try. That's why Stockfish is suggesting this. He says, you can have this measly h-pawn. At least I get to take your strong knight and your center pawn, and I'll just fight from here. And again, black has a better position than a few moves before. Okay. So what we see in the play of the white player is that maybe he should try and activate all of his pieces. He is trying some outings. Yeah, he's seeing, maybe, does this bring me some success? No, I'll try something different. Does this bring me some success? No, I'll try something different. But the queen was actually quite well placed on a7, putting pressure on the opponent's half of the board. Then he managed to put the knight on d5. Then he should have tried to manage to put the rook on a better square, and maybe also later the bishop. That's probably how you play chess the best way. If you really want to put up the pressure, you try and involve all the pieces and maximize their activity. So that's why black is still kicking, right? But he didn't play the counterattack bishop e6. He played rook h8. Of course, that's a poor reactive decision. But we can't really blame him, I suppose, because the position is difficult. But now white's next move is not so difficult. You just try and attack it for the second time. And I'm just asking myself, could you now try... No, you can't play this because you blocked the rook, so the h-pawn is lost. Yeah, the h-pawn is lost. And you're not ready to recapture on d5. So what he still tries now, but it's basically resignation. He now plays the bishop back. But of course this means that now white can free up the f-file again and win the pawn on g4 and pin the knight on g6. But I suppose this is what happens if you're under pressure. But again, I think that black is making white's task a little bit too easy here. Well, he can still protect on f6, but here black player fails to see that h4, h5 wins the knight on g6, and here he resigned. Okay, well, I think that's a lengthy video, but quite a lot of content in this game. Quite a lot of content. Confusing game here and there. Difficult for me to try and explain everything, but fortunately I have my analytical assistant Stockfish to try and make sense of it. And hopefully I succeeded at humanizing, translating some of these inaccuracies, mistakes and blunders made by both sides. Okay, well, congratulations to Jonathan for winning this game. You know the drill. Please subscribe to the channel. Smash that like button. I'll do that for you. Ow. That hurt. Don't smash the like button. And please comment. How did you feel about the game? Did you like it? How did you feel about white's play? How did you feel about black's play? Any suggestions there? I do read all the comments, so feel free to comment. And don't forget, better your chess.